So you are going to be using a 12 by 18 sheet of paper for this, so a pretty big paper. And you are going to measure 3 inches from each side. So I'm going to come down here, line my 3 inches up with the side of my paper here, and mark the end. Since it's such a big paper, I'm going to kind of move this along here so that I have somewhere to line my ruler up. So marking at 3 inches. And I'm going to do that all the way around the paper so I know where my border needs to be. 3 inches, 3 inches, 3 inches, all the way around. That way you have an inner rectangle once you're done. And then once I have these little lines, I will be able to line my ruler up on them and draw my rectangle on the inside. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead. So I have my line here and here. Place your pencil on there so you can hit your ruler to it. Make sure it's lined up with the one across from it. Draw your line. Kind of move your ruler along. Make sure it's lined up. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this. And here's my line here. Lining it up. Make sure it's straight. Draw nice and light in case you have to edit this rectangle a little bit. It's going to be kind of a narrower rectangle because we want to have a lot of area outside of the border as well so that our subject can expand beyond the border, since this is a beyond the border project. Once you have your rectangle, you're going to be ready to start drawing your image that you have chosen, which should be some kind of animal. I'm going to edit my sides here. Okay, so there's my rectangle, and you'll notice the border's pretty big. This is the funny guy that I decided to go with. How you position your paper, landscape or portrait, is totally up to you, but we're drawing big because he needs to expand or extend outside of the border. So we're going to draw from observation for this. So you need to start with a really general shape and to figure out the size. Before you invest a lot of time into detail, just start with a general shape. So I'm going to start with this big arch, and I'm going to I want to go beyond this border here. So I'm going to kind of sketch in where I think I might like him to go. And I'm not going to do a lot of detail yet. I'm going to pay attention as I move my way around. Kind of coming in with the curve of that eye, come out with his little funky jaw here. Again, I'm just figuring out how big I want him to be right now, and then I will worry about all the detail work. His bottom of his mouth here gets kind of cut off, but I want to go ahead and put that in. And this side, that you can see kind of part of his body back behind the eye, so it's a little different shape on that side. Comes kind of down like this and then comes around like that. Very general shape. I can change that shape. I feel like he might be wider, so I'll probably expand that. Then I'll start to come in and kind of put in where I think the rest of this is going to go. And I'm making him pretty big because I need him to go outside the border a little bit. So there's his little fin coming out in the background. Another little fin coming out over here. And then once I feel comfortable with the size of him, I might change the shape a little bit. I can start coming in and saying, all right, well, this is where his eye is, right? Kind of sketch in where I think that's going to go. And for your initial sketch, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can edit things. You need to draw really lightly. If you have trouble drawing lightly, grab a 2H graphite pencil and sketch using that, because that'll be a little bit lighter. Okay. And this kind of goes like this. And this eye is in a little bit further from the side of the body. Kind of an almondy shape. Round around the outside. Kind of narrow there. where's his little funny nostril things? They're kind of over here, kind of over here. He's a good looking little fella. And then paying attention to kind of the mouth size. I'm doing that inner shape right there. And I'm moving fairly quickly through this, so you guys can kind of see where you're headed with this. Take your time with the drawing portion so that it looks pretty accurate, even if it's a kind of goofy looking picture like this. You still want it to be pretty accurate as far as sizing. Make sure you're going beyond the borders. And kind of the bottom of his mouth, I can go in and kind of place that. He's got a lot of texture, which is going to be a lot of work for me, but the dots don't have to be in the exact spot either. So there's this kind of funny little mouth. And let's see what else I'm going to add here, his little tail. So I'm going to keep moving forward to this. Remember, you need to expand beyond the border. Once you finish your main subject, then you got to decide what's going to go in the background. So for example, if I'm going to add things like maybe seaweed might be cool. I might add some seaweed. I want it to expand beyond those borders so that I can really play with the idea of the watercolor and the ink. So outside of the border is going to be where you're placing the ink shading. Once it enters this inner rectangle, that becomes the watercolor paint or the watercolor pencil. Your main subject is going to be completely watercolor paint or watercolor pencil. Main subject gets full color, even outside the border. This guy is going to change depending on where he hits the border. So for my main subject, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those lines so that I can just paint him regular, because he's just going to be fully watercolor painted. Okay, these other areas are going to change depending on where they come in and out of the border. And I could add things like rocks, coral, whatever I want to do. I could do other little fish in the background. So I'm going to go ahead and finish with my sketch, and then I'll kind of move to the next step so you can see where you're going to head from there. All right, so I have chosen to use watercolor pencils. You could also use regular watercolor paint. Remember, the main subject's going to be fully colored in or painted, and then your other subjects are going to be kind of black ink, hatching, stippling, cross hatching, and then color within the box, and then back to the black and whites. So with the watercolor pencils, you can color directly as if you're coloring with colored pencil. And then you don't even have to fill it in necessarily all the way. You can kind of do something like this. And I'm not even entirely sure what color this guy's supposed to be, but I'm choosing colors that I want to do. I want it to be nice and bright. So I'm kind of coming in, and then I'm going to grab a paintbrush. I probably need a smaller one than I have here. And I'm going to use water. I'm going to get as much water as I can off because it doesn't need to be crazy. Make sure your water is clean so that you don't have murky colors. And then I'm going to come in, and it actually turns it to paint. So you're going to see it start to kind of fade out into there. You can even layer colors if you want. Like I could use like an orange and a red, or an orange and a pink, or a red and a pink, and kind of play with those. I also think I'm going to pay attention to where he might be lit more. So I'm going to create like a little bit darker and then fade to a value scale from his edge here. Make sure that as you're coloring, you're focused on your craftsmanship, which means that you are coloring in one direction, you're coloring neatly, you're not going all over the place. So I'm just coming in and I'm creating kind of a value scale. My thought is darkening some areas, like I might darken around where his eye is here. And when I look at this image, there's a lot of creases and things that I might want to come in and kind of focus on. And I might do that kind of with this pink as well. Maybe even add in a couple extra lines here. His middle of his eye is super black, so I really think that if you have black areas to do, that you do those last, because the black can really blend out into everything. You could even use like Sharpie if you wanted, or use, you can use watercolor, just watch that you don't let it blend out into that. So I'm just continuing on here, and I would continue throughout my whole fish. I could even kind of color this in directly over the dots and then go in with the color for the dots at the end if I wanted to. Make it a little easier. So I could come in, do something like this, going lighter. Then I'm gonna grab my clean brush. If your water gets dirty again, please clean it. And kind of start to go over that. And move across the paper. Speaking of dirty brushes, I think mine had a little bit of dark in it. Make sure your brush is clean, because otherwise you'll end up with dark color in it like mine is doing. And if I lose the fact that I made those darker sections, you can go back in and re-emphasize that. You can also dip your watercolor pencil right into the water and get a little bit darker shading that way too. Just be aware that you don't want to get holes in your paper, so don't let your paper get too saturated, especially if you're marking on it with pencil after the fact. And then I could take this, if my dots are kind of blended in, and re-emphasize those a little bit more too. That I dipped directly into the water and went onto the paper with. So you're gonna see that's gonna be a little bit darker. All right, so you're gonna work with your watercolor pencil. Again, I probably would go in and do this really black section. I may even add like a reflection in. Now we're gonna look at kind of what to do for, I would continue painting this guy. Remember, he's gonna be painted the whole subject, main subject. Out here, if it's something that's gonna cross the border, it's going to go to hatching and cross hatching or stippling out here. You can use a regular black ink pen. You can use Sharpie. You can use a little of both. So I'm just kind of coming in and outlining the sections that are going to be done in ink or Sharpie. And then I'm going to decide how I want that to look. So again, you could do something like come in with a regular black ink pen if you wanted. This is hatching, and I'm trying to just give a curve. The more you add to it, the darker the value is, meaning the shading on that side, okay? So if I wanted to do that over here, I could do the same thing over here, and since this section's a little bit bigger, I could go a little bit bigger. Maybe I also want to round it out from the other side. I could do that as well in certain places, maybe not as heavily. So this gives the idea that it's got a curve. And if you don't feel comfortable doing this directly on your drawing first, practice a little more in your journal before you do it. You should have completed a practice in your journal before trying this in your artwork. And again, don't go past that border with the ink pen. So I could do something like that. And then where it's within the border, that's actually where I'm going to go in with my watercolor pencil. And I'm going to try dipping it directly in there. To get it a little brighter. This does act like watercolor paint, so watercolor paint or watercolor pencil, you do not want to do two wet colors next to each other, so I wouldn't go do the blue of the water right away. I would let this section dry first. So something like, remembering that I need to be neat with my coloring. You could even add different shades of green in. You don't have to stick to just one. And you can build up your layers of pencil. I'm just putting down kind of a base coat right now. But you'll notice when it goes outside that border, that's where it turns to ink, and inside is where the color is existing. That doesn't mean you can't come back with the ink at the end and add some ink detailing to the inside of the piece. It's just that the color is staying in here, except on the main subject. So there's kind of my, I'm gonna make sure my paintbrush is clean this time because it was not clean when I tried to do the fish's face. So I'm just gonna come in and very carefully go over this to turn it into paint. It's a pretty harsh line where I did the border, so I might, this is cutting in, keeping a nice straight line. I might go in and darken up the value along the edge of that. So you're noticing that the color is switching. Again, I wouldn't do the blue next. I'd maybe work on my green and then continue to add the color not right next to each other until the screen's dry. Then I could do like the blues. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead. There you go, you can see the pen and ink out here. Out here would be like the ocean, so I would think about another way to do some shading. Like if I'm trying to create the feeling that there's different, maybe I could do like the waves, something fun like stippling that gives the idea that there's waves through here. Just so it adds a little more interest because it's kind of boring just being all white like that. So think about what you can do to make it more visually appealing. And also watch that you don't get those little tails like I did. Slow down on the dots. All right. Make sure you're working through the packet as you are working on this project. Whoops, I went right in the background. That's okay. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put those waves right in there too. I would still do the color in here even though I've added some ink in here. And once this is dry, I may even decide to go in with my pen and add those kind of same ink details over my color. I'm not sure if I want to do that yet, but I'm going to look at it and see how I feel about it once I add the color everywhere. And you can also consider if you want to draw in the border or not with your Sharpie at the end. Just remember where areas are wet, not to mess with it until it's dry. All right, let's go ahead and get started.